Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining our webinar. Really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to join us. We're just going to spend about an hour talking about how to update names and gender markers on federal identity documents. But before we jump into that, I think it's probably good to do some introductions. So let us know if you're having audio concerns or problems with the webinar, and we'll be glad to address those as they come up. So for introductions, let my colleague introduce herself.
My name is Jade, and I work for the Transgender Center as a helpline associate.
And I'm Sasha Book. Sasha, I am a staff attorney and policy counsel at Transgender Law Center. And we're just going to talk today about some general information that you should know regarding updating your state identity documents, and then we'll talk also about how to update your federal identity documents. The actual documents that we'll go through are how to update your Social Security account, and then how to update a passport, and we'll also talk about how to update your consular report of birth abroad and other immigration documents, and then we'll open it up for some questions and answers. So before we jump into the specific requirements for making amendments on your federal identity documents, it's important just to touch on the issues surrounding what is required to update your state-issued identity documents. And if you're probably already familiar with these, but just wanted to flag them for folks interested in updating your state-issued identity documents. Those would be, obtaining a name and gender change, name or gender change on your birth certificate, state-issued birth certificate, and then your name and gender change on a state-issued identification. And the requirements, for amending those documents, vary from state to state, and we could spend an hour just talking about the process in Georgia or Nevada or California. So unfortunately, we just don't have the time to spend today to focus in on those requirements and to walk through the process. But I'll mention a couple of resources in a second, but just want to flag it early and often that we've got a publication on our website called ID Please that walks through in detail the process for updating your requirements, and we also have a helpline that will hopefully send out to you all the email information how to contact us to get more specific information about how to change your identity documents on your state identity documents. Also, the one I forgot to mention also was the court order name change and court order gender change that you can get within individual states or many individual states. And again, this just summarizes what I just said, I guess, but each state has its own requirements, for all of these different processes. And in addition to our website, the National Center for Transgender Equality also has, a really helpful identity document center that walks through what you would need to update your state-issued ID or birth certificate, or to get a court order in individual states. And we encourage people to go there, or to go to our website, or to contact us or them or any of these organizations that work on identity documents. I believe that Lambda Legal also has a really helpful name and gender change identity document center. So just to provide a little background, I've been doing this work for about 6 years, and I've never seen as much enthusiasm and interest around the process for updating federal or just generally identity documents, and it's very encouraging and welcome. If you don't know this already, barriers to identity documents are an enormous issue for our community. The National Transgender Discrimination Survey found that only 41% of our folks had only 41% of our folks had been able to update all of their state-issued ID, because of the barriers that are in place, and this has a huge impact on people's lives. When you have to, if you just think about, every time that you've had to pull out, an identification to prove who you are, whether it's going to, a restaurant and ordering a beer, or getting on a plane, or opening up bank account or getting a job. It's really critical that we have access to accurate ID. And also voting. There's so many circumstances that we just don't think about that are a daily concern in our lives, and it's just really important that I'm pleased to see this advocacy moving forward, and the energy and enthusiasm around it. And just to provide a little background, though, for unfortunately, part of the enthusiasm right now is in response to the change in administration, and folks are rightfully concerned about what the federal government might or might not do. We don't have a crystal ball. We can't tell folks what is going to happen, but the federal government is subject to the current changing administrations, and one area of advocacy that's been worked on for many years is advocacy around changing the barriers to accessing accurate federal identity documents such as Social Security accounts and passports and other federal IDs. And one welcome step forward has been that the Social Security Administration and the Passport Agency and the Veterans Administration and other federal agencies have changed the standard that was in place for many years, which was a standard that required folks to undergo sterilizing gender reassignment surgery prior to being able to update the gender marker, at least on their identity documents. And of course, again, sorry to go into so much background, but I'm just going to assume a lot of folks aren't that familiar with some of these issues. But that's a huge barrier for our community because folks still face enormous amounts of healthcare exclusions in their healthcare plans, and aren't able to access gender reassignment surgery in order to have an accurate ID, which again opens them to discrimination and harassment on a daily basis. In addition to folks not having access to healthcare to begin with, of course there's a lot of people in our community that don't want to undergo reassignment surgery, and it doesn't make you any more or less of a transgender person. Any amount of healthcare is irrelevant to who we are. And in addition, there's a lot of folks that have coexisting conditions, that prevent them from being able to access this care. So it's just a terrible standard, and thankfully the federal government's moved forward. On the state level, of course, many states still require surgical care. Unfortunately, that's changing thanks to some great work that NCP and other organizations are doing to advocate, to remove those barriers, to move to what the federal government has implemented as a standard that we'll dig into in a second when we talk about the required documents that folks need to update their Social Security account and their passport. And this might be, some of the urgency around changing identity documents is, unfortunately, a little more complicated because, in order to obtain a name change court order to change both your name and gender on your federal identity documents, you have to get a name change court order in your individual state, and that can take some time. It can take up to 6 months, and it can be, pretty costly. So, there has been, this question arises frequently, so we just wanted to address it early. Is that there are folks that are considering, updating their gender markers because it's something they can do, more immediately, with the federal agencies, the Social Security Administration and the Passport Agency. And then, going back and getting the name change court order in their individual states, and then going back again. The only thing to flag about that is that, that might be a smart way to move forward, to change your gender marker if you're concerned about, a new administration tightening those requirements. But the only, thing to know is that, you could be facing, additional fees, especially with the passport agencies, to update, your gender marker with them, and then to go back to your individual state, get the name change court order, and then go back to change both your name and gender marker on your documents. So let's dig in. Let's talk about federal identity documents. That's where we're here, and I think that we're going to be, if folks have questions as we move forward, we'll be, we have our helpline guru is here to help us, answer some of the questions that come up individually, and but we'll be tracking them and collecting them. So feel free to send them our way, as we move forward. And again, we're going to start with the Social Security Administration and then move into the passport agency and immigration documents. So the Social Security Administration, is a pretty basic process to update your name and gender change, but there are some things to know. And one is that you actually have to go in person to the Social Security Administration offices. You can't do it through email or over the phone. You have to go in person. You don't have to make an appointment, but you do have to go, and you might have to wait for a while, depending on where you live, to get your paperwork processed. And one thing to know too is that there's a small fee for updating your Social Security account. It's usually around $10. The other thing to know is that Social Security cards, this is often a little confusing, don't actually have a gender marker on them. But they do have a record. It's a record that does have a gender on it, and it's really important that if you're need to make sure that your ID is accurate, that you take this critical step, because the Social Security Administration obviously communicates with your employer, and for a while back there were issues with Social Security sending mismatched letters to employers because of the information, and the Social Security account wasn't matching up with what the employer had. I think there's been some great work to stop that from happening, but just something to know is that the Social Security Administration, communicates with employers, and exchanges information. The other thing to know that's really critical is that your Social Security name and gender is also communicated, impacts if you're on Social Security insurance or Medicaid. It's really important that when you change your gender marker, especially your name and gender marker, that you communicate to the Social Security Administration office that they should move forward with updating your Social Security disability benefits in your individual state, or to take an affirmative step to contact them yourself after you've changed your gender marker on your Social Security account. So that's a really important step that sometimes doesn't get mentioned. One thing that's important to flag is that if you're under 18, that you have to have a parent or guardian come in and help with the Social Security account if you're not emancipated. Okay, so let's dig into the actual form a little bit. The form that is used for changing both the name and the gender and any demographic information really is just a standard form, and it's called the SS5 form. It's called the application for a Social Security card. The form doesn't cost anything, and you can download it online. And we'll be sending this PowerPoint out to folks if you want to use this to link to the form. But the form should be filled out using your new name, if you're obtaining both a name and gender, if you're applying for both a name and gender change, you can pre-fill the form out before you go into the office and save you a step, if that's helpful. Okay, so let's talk about some of the required documents that are needed in order to get a name and gender change on your Social Security account. And we'll talk about what the differences are between just getting a gender change on your Social Security account versus name and gender, but really the only difference is that if you're getting both the name and gender change on your Social Security account, you have to bring in your court order for your name change. So it's that simple. But there's 4 documents that are really needed, for obtaining both a name and gender change on your Social Security account. So before you go to the Social Security office, you'll want to pre-fill that form out, that SS5 form, and in a second we'll go through that and show you what it would look like. And we have a model form that we filled out with just a Jane Doe or something similar to that we'll share with folks if you're interested, as a template to work from. But so you want to fill the form out before you go in, that SS5, and then you want to also make sure, the Social Security Administration requires that folks, have some kind of proof of U.S. citizenship or immigration status. And that can be, a birth certificate or a passport. One thing to note about that is that it can't be expired documents. They have to be, they can't be expired. It can't be an expired passport, or and the document doesn't have to be in your current name and gender, as long as you can document the change. And then if you're, getting both a name and gender change on your Social Security record, you'll also want to provide a copy of your court order, your name change court order. And every state provides, name change court orders. Some states won't provide a gender change court order, but that's not needed to update your Social Security account. If you just want to change your name, you just need the name change court order. So that's an important step, and that's the one that takes a little time. So if you're feeling like you just need to move forward as soon as possible and get a gender change court order, you don't need this piece to be able to change your gender marker on your Social Security account record. And then the other thing you need is some kind of proof of identity, and just to show who you are, and that can be a state-issued ID, a driver's license or an identity document. And that, again, has to be current, and then a passport as well. And again, it doesn't have to be in your current name and gender. And if you're not a U.S. citizen, then you have to provide some kind of U.S. immigration document. And then the last thing, and probably the most important thing for a lot of folks, that are sitting in on this, is the requirements for updating your gender marker, with the Social Security Administration. So folks can update their Social Security account with the gender marker on with the following options. These are all ors. You can update it with either a court order gender change, and we're probably going to assume that there's not going to be very many folks doing that. And then, or a state-issued amended birth certificate listing the correct gender, and that's probably not as common either, because most people, start with this step, and so it takes a while to get these documents before doing the birth certificate. But also, a lot of folks, another option available for folks is an updated full validity U.S. passport, and full validity means a 10-year passport that folks can present. But finally, the document that a lot of folks use is a declaration from a physician stating that you've had appropriate clinical treatment for gender change. And this is a letter, provided. It's called a medical certification that's provided from a physician, and it's just a physician, by the way, who either has reviewed your medical history or has treated one's medical history. And there is a requirement that somebody has a doctor-patient relationship, but that's not been defined, or we've never heard of folks being denied care based on some kind of investigation into whether or not there was truly a doctor-patient requirement. So that's what the requirements say under Social Security. But we found, just from doing probably thousands of these at this point, that the template letter that we've provided, and that is actually taken from the Social Security Administration itself, has been highly effective, and we just have not heard of folks not getting their Social Security Administration gender marker changed based on using this template letter. And the template letter is really basic, and it just walks you through what the physician needs to fill in. It just states I, and then the physician's name, and then the medical license or certificate number, and et cetera. So we'll be glad to, we have this model letter is available on our website, and I think that we'll be sending this out along with the PowerPoint, to anyone who's interested to have on hand, if you're, thinking about going, to see a physician. One thing I will flag that I think Hade will touch on a little later is that a similar letter is required for updating your gender marker on your passport, but the only difference, I think, between the letters is that the passport agency letter requires that you include your DEA number, And so a physician, if you're talking to a physician and you're getting this letter and you're looking to change both your Social Security Administration and your passport, might encourage you to, just ask your physician to include that information so you have that on hand for both identity documents, if that makes sense. And just a couple of other small things to know is that the Social Security Administration will send the card to you in the mail once they've processed it. You won't get it at the time of processing. They'll just send it to you. It usually takes 2 or 3 weeks. It doesn't take long for them to, in our experience, for them to send you an updated document. And then one thing I found kind of interesting was that in doing a little research was that they will only allow you to get 3 Social Security cards per year and 10 per lifetime. I don't know if that's ever been tested, but that's just useful or maybe not so useful information for folks. So I think I'll stop there and turn it over to my colleague Hade, who's going to walk us through how to update the name and or gender change on passports and immigration documents.
Hey y'all, this is Hade. We are now going to be speaking on how to amend your name and gender on U.S. passports. A person is able to get a full regular validity passport for 10 years, and this can be used as a proof of citizenship and as well as instead of a birth certificate for folks who encounter problems with having not being able to amend their birth certificates in some states. For one to change their name and or gender on the U.S. passport, you will have to use one of the 3 forms that's listed on this slide. Which form depends on a couple of factors, and each form is listed here. We're going to go into the first one. Form DS5504. The link is there. The link is there on this slide to connect you to it if you need to download that one. And this form can only be used to amend your name on your passport if you have obtained a passport within 1 year of the date of issue. And you can see that within your passport of when it was issued. There is no fee for updating your name using this form, and this can also be submitted by mail. It is also very important to know that the DS5504 may not be used to change your gender marker. Let's go on to the next form a person can use. This next form can be used to amend your name on your passport if your passport was issued more than a year ago. There is a fee you must pay to amend your name using this form, and you can also apply by mail. And then finally, we have the form DS11, and there's also a link there for that one. And this is the only form that you can use to update your name and gender. It is a form that a person must use if they have never had a passport, regardless if they are updating their name or gender. This form must be submitted in person, and I've included a link there. Document the list of locations where a person can submit their application. And there's also other information that are guidelines by this form that a person must follow. We can go over them. This is if you've never received a passport, which we just went over. If you are under the age of 16, and if also as well if you were under the age of 16 and you previously were issued a passport. If your passport was issued more than 15 years ago, if your passport was lost or stolen, And so if you were requesting a gender marker, or if your name has changed since the previous U.S. passport was issued, but you are unable to legally document your name change. Um, um, And then we have the same information that we just went over. This is the list of where you can submit the DS-11. There's a lot of agencies within every state. And this is the checklist for the items needed to amend your name and gender on your U.S. passport. You need a copy of that Form DS-11 filled out, a certified copy of your court-ordered name change, two 2x2-inch photographs of yourself, proof of U.S. citizenship such as a previous passport or a birth certificate, or a valid form of government-issued photo identification such as a previous passport or driver's license, a letter from an attending medical physician stating you have undergone appropriate clinical treatment for gender transition, and some fees. And this is a checklist for changing your name only on your U.S. passport. You can use either Form DS-55504, DS-82, or DS-11. You will need a certified copy of your court order name change, two 2x2-inch photographs of yourself, if submitted to DS-82 or DS-11, proof of U.S. citizenship such as a previous passport or birth certificate, a valid form of issued identification, a government-issued photo identification such as a previous passport or driver's license, and then some other fees when submitting those two forms. This is the list, a checklist for changing your gender only on U.S. passports. So you'll need Form DS-11, two 2x2-inch photographs of yourself, a proof of U.S. citizenship, such as a previous passport, birth certificate, a valid form of government-issued photo identification, such as your passport or driver's license, and then as well as a letter from a medical licensed physician with office letterhead stating that you have undergone appropriate clinical treatment for gender transition. And we've also included the declaration, an example of the exact wording that is looked for, and then some fees as well for that. And then this slide, you can look up current application fees on the link provided. The U.S. Department of State allows you to use the photograph that represents you and the way you look, regardless of whether that photo stereotypically corresponds to the gender marker on your passport. Now we're going to now talk about U.S. immigration documents. A person is able to update their immigration documents such as employment authorization card, their permanent residency card, also known as their green card, a U.S. Naturalization Certificate, and then that would all reflect your name, your accurate name and gender. We like to tell all folks who call in that it's a good idea to consult an immigration attorney prior to starting any application process. And then to amend one's gender on any immigration document, one must either submit a court-ordered gender change, which can be obtained in some states. I believe 5 states can be obtained, or a physician's declaration stating that you have undergone appropriate clinical treatment to change your gender. This physician's declaration is nearly identical to the model letter we provided for Social Security and passport amendments, but it also needs to include the drug enforcement the DEA, also known as the Drug Enforcement Administration registration number, or a comparable registration number from another country, and issuing state/country of medical license. So for a person to update their employment authorization card, also known as their green card, they must use Form I-765. And we provided a link there that connects the form and instructions, the physician's declaration that we just stated previously, that will have included the DEA number. And again, it is generally a good idea to consult an immigration attorney prior to starting any application process. For a person to amend their permanent residence card, they must use Form I-90, and then we've linked a link there. We've attached a link on the slide with instructions on how to go about that. On the form, under the reason, within this Form I-90, you will see under the reason for application, a person must check box 2E. My name or other biographical information has been legally changed since my last permanent card was issued. And now we are going to move on to updating the name and gender on a U.S. Naturalization Certificate. A person needs to use Form N565, and we've included a link to this document on the slide. Within this form, under Part 2, Question 2, a person needs to mark either both D for name change and F for gender change, and then follow the other instructions. And that is all. I'm going to pass this on to Sasha.
Thanks, Heide, and thanks, everybody. So we've got some time now. I'm not sure exactly how much time we have, maybe 20 minutes or so. So we are going to open up the floor for questions, and thank goodness we have a lot of information in the room in the form of Danny that's going to help us, who's already been helping folks with questions that have come in. But why don't we just open it up and see if we can discuss more deeply. And one thing I didn't really talk about that I wanted to and regretted was to dig in a little more about the appropriate clinical treatment standard. Just one thing to flag about that is that, it definitely does not mean surgical care, but it doesn't affirmatively mean any specific standard. It's a standard that's set between, it's an individualized standard that's set between, yourself and a doctor. And we encourage folks to, not ask a doctor to include specific information about what health care you've received, because we don't want to create the appearance that there is, some kind of objective medical threshold that people have to meet before being able to update their identity documents. So it's just an intentionally general standard because there isn't a one-size-fits-all requirement for getting a letter that says appropriate clinical treatment.
First, I just wanted to point out to everyone that Social Security Administration does not require a DEA number of immigration documents for the letter there. That declaration should have a DEA number, but both passport and Social Security don't. Those letters are identical, so you don't need a different declaration. And then, so a question that someone had, we have a lot of questions, and then I'll pass it over, is so if someone needs to update their gender with Social Security, can they do that in the state that they currently live? And then what kind of standard is required? So a clarification about can they bring a therapist letter to update their gender with Social Security?
Yeah, thanks, Danny. Yeah, and you can find your Social Security Administration, local one fairly easily just by going on to the Social Security Administration website and find, where your local office is. I think most cities have, one fairly accessible, but let us know if you're having troubles, finding a local Social Security Administration. But it can definitely be in your state, and should definitely be in your city. But if you're having troubles in any way, certainly let us know, and we'll follow up with you. And yeah, for the physician's letter, unfortunately, you don't have to, maybe I misunderstood the question, but you don't need to go back to the state where you were born to get your Social Security account updated. You can do it in any office, so if you were born in Florida, but you currently live in Las Vegas, you can go to the Las Vegas Social Security Administration to update your Social Security account. They have it's a federal agency, so they can find all the information in whichever office they use. And then I think there was a question about, the requirement, who can write the letter for a person. And just to clarify, it's got to be in the form of an original signed statement from a licensed physician. In other words, it has to be a doctor of medicine or a doctor of osteopathy, a DEO. We don't obviously agree with that barrier. We think that any social worker, well, we don't think there should be a standard at all, but we also think that there has to be one. It should be, a therapist should be able to sign off on it, but unfortunately the way the current requirement is set up is that it has to be a medical certification of appropriate clinical treatment from a doctor of medicine or a doctor of osteopathy.
So we have another question about from a mother of a trans kid who's wondering if the kid needs to be present at the Social Security appointment. I think ideally that a child shouldn't be required to be there with the parent as long as the parent has all of the appropriate information. But it is possible that an agent might request that, but there's no specific requirement that that's true. Another question, what kind of doctor is qualified to say what is appropriate treatment?
Yeah, and I'm just tagging on to the first question. Yeah, I just want to say that we just have never heard of anyone letting us know that there was a requirement that someone under 18 be also present at the Social Security office. But we'll if you want to contact us directly, we'll dig deeper if that would be helpful. And then again, the question about what kind of doctor has to be the person providing the medical certification for appropriate clinical treatment. It's again got to be a licensed physician who is either a doctor of medicine or a doctor of osteopathy. A DO or an MD are the only two licensed physicians that the Social Security Administration will currently accept. Yeah, so like I think that things, maybe it might be helpful to kind of clarify what kind of person or what kind of licensed physician would not qualify. So it would just be anybody that isn't a doctor of medicine or a doctor of osteopathy. So if someone were a naturopath, for example, that's somebody that wouldn't be able to certify, unfortunately. Or if they were a therapist or a psychiatrist, that unless they were a doctor of medicine, wouldn't be able to sign the letter.
And we have another question about what kind of order someone should go through with the federal documents in terms of, what should they do first, second?
Yeah, that's a really great question. There's not one right way, to move forward with updating identity documents, but we always encourage people, if you're thinking about, this kind of goes back to some of the issues that we were discussing earlier, but if you, are looking to, not have to, go back to different agencies, we would encourage you to get, a name change court order first, because that's, a key piece in updating all of these documents regarding names. If you just want to move forward with a gender, marker, again, we would encourage, thinking about moving forward with updating your Social Security account because of the impact that has on, any communication that might take place between the Social Security Administration and your employer or with your Social Security benefits. But again, there's not only one right way to do it, but we would encourage getting a name change court order and then moving to the Social Security and then thinking about changing your state-issued ID and the other federal identity documents. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add on to that, Hadi. Okay, great.
So this is another clarification about who can write the letters. Is the restriction to DOs and MDs for qualification to write the letter true about all of these documents, like passports also?
I don't have the requirements for the passport agency in front of me, but I'm pretty sure that it is an MD that is required. Yeah, I'm getting nods from my colleagues in the room. So yeah, I don't have I looked into the Social Security Administration information, but yeah, it sounds like it's the same standard that it would require a medical doctor or a DO to sign up for the passport agency. So both for the Social Security Administration and for the passport agency, it would have to be, one of these folks, unfortunately.
So this is kind of a question about next steps. So once someone has updated their federal docs and gotten their name changed, when should they notify other agencies like insurance carriers and et cetera, before or after? So they're doing federal first and then name. Should they notify their insurance companies now about gender changes or wait until their name is done? Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's that sounds like it would be, an individualized, decision, but I think I would recommend if you're going to be moving forward with changing your gender marker on your Social Security account and your passport agency or other federal IDs, that it does make sense to me that you would want to communicate that to your insurance providers, before, going forward with a name change court order. You'll have to go back to them again after you get your name change court order to update that information, but I'll leave it open to my colleagues to chime in if they feel differently, but I feel like it might be appropriate to make sure, that your whatever federal information is being reported to the state is consistent, especially regarding your gender marker and your insurance coverage. So would encourage, to move forward with contacting, your, insurance provider or whoever else you want to change your gender marker with. But again, one of the more challenging pieces of that is that, you'll likely need, to go back and get your name change court order and then go back again to, all these different places that you're going to be informing, that you've changed your gender marker. So.
And then one last question. Someone wanted us to comment on, there have been some counties, like in California, Santa Cruz County, and other places where people have been successful in getting non-binary court-ordered gender changes. Could you talk a little bit about how, if someone has one of those or is interested, this would affect their federal documents?
Yeah, it's a really big question, and thanks for asking. Yeah, so you're right. There has been a lot of movement recently, in folks being able to, or at least beginning to see folks being able to get court orders that reflect non-binary identities, and it's of course just as important that we that our non-binary folks in our community are accurately reflected on their IDs as for anyone else. So it's really important that folks don't have to pick male or female when obtaining accurate ID And in addition to the court order that was issued, in Santa Cruz, there was one issued in Oregon. And I think that I just saw a news article this morning that the DMV is looking into the issue, and we'll be thinking about it. And we're also talking to advocates across the country about how we can to move this work forward. And as far as the federal piece goes, I know that Lambda Legal has challenged the requirement, or the binary requirement on the passport agency, and that litigation is still in progress, but as we've seen some hopeful turns in the briefing. One thing to note is that this isn't something new or revolutionary. This is something that's been done in a lot of places around the world, and we're hopeful that that will be happening here soon. For example, Germany has a third gender marker, New Zealand does as well, and Nepal and India. So Australia, yeah, my colleague Todd is telling me Australia. So yeah, so this is exciting, and it's just such an important piece of the work that we continue to make sure that non-binary people are legally recognized, for who they are. I think we're going to open it up for one more question.
Well, we have a few in here I'm trying to pick. So someone is wondering if they've changed their name on their birth certificate, if they could just submit that to the passport agency to update their name, or if they should include a copy of their name change court order. Yeah, I can respond. So I think that while there is a way to potentially show just a pile of evidence. So if someone submits just a copy of their birth certificate with their name changed to a passport agency, it's likely that passport will come back to them and ask for additional verification of their name change in terms of other documents. So if you want to make sure it goes through quickly, a certified copy of a court-ordered name change is really the most efficient way to apply for a name change with the passport agency.
Well, we're going to stop there. We're always, again, available for additional questions, and again, I'll just remind people that we have a lot of information on our website that walks through, what we've talked about today in detail. And we're going to be sharing the PowerPoint, with folks, and we'll have it on our website who attended, so you can listen to it again if you want. And also want to let people know that there is going to be a name and gender change clinic in the Bay Area on January 7th that Transgender Law Center is going to be helping with, and we're really excited because we've got a whole bunch of doctors on board to help with that process. So that's going to be happening, and we'll also provide examples, model examples of how to fill out the Social Security forms and the passport agency forms and the immigration forms. But let us know if you have follow-up questions, or if there are other webinars that you would like us to present sometime in the future. We're delighted to share what we know about the process, and would hope that this will be a continuing conversation. So thanks so much, and hope everybody has a really nice weekend and a wonderful holiday season.